For our final talk this hour, I'm going to be speaking with Tom Arndt about his new book, American Reflections, published by Atelier EXB. Yes. Take a seat. You've got a water. This is for you, so do try and speak closely into it as much as possible. Okay, please join me in welcoming Tom Arndt. So welcome, Tom.
Pleasure to be here.
So I'm going to give a very brief introduction to somebody that has had a very long career, so I'm going to leave a lot of things out. But you're born in Minneapolis.
Correct,
in 1944, and I think that city is an important, has been a very important to your work over the years.
Yes, it has.
And you're known for your work in the kind of grand tradition of American documentary photography.
Mm-hmm.
And you have also, as I said, you've been particularly faithful to your native state of Minnesota and have photographed it intensely over the years.
Yes, yeah. Yes,
and I believe you live in St. Paul in
I live
Minnesota?
in St. Paul, Minnesota, and that's where I learned how to photograph in my home state. I mean, I had to figure out how to visually understand my world, my local world, because it's unique. Like every part of the country is unique. And as I gained confidence and the ability to expand my vision, I started to travel to other parts of the country. And now I've basically been to most parts of the country, several times. I photographed in big cities, a lot of work in New York, Washington, D.C., New Orleans, Dallas, Louisville, Nashville, Memphis, San Francisco, L.A., a lot of Chicago. But I always gravitate, when I'm not anywhere else, I always am back at home making pictures. Because,
right. And so we're here to discuss your book, American Reflections, published by Atelier EXB,
right.
Which has just been released.
Which I'm very excited and very grateful. This is a big honor for me.
And I mean, as you mentioned, naming some of these cities that you've photographed over the years, and I think many of those are reflected in this book. Sorry, reflected, no pun intended.
Yes.
And this book brings together over 40 years of work. I think the first pictures are in 1970.
Correct.
And could you tell us a bit about the process of kind of condensing all of these years of pictures into this this single book?
Well, it was a very collaborative process. Where I have been so fortunate is to work, and I have to say this, I have worked with a great group of people at my publisher. The publisher, I can't call him the publisher I've been privileged to work with. That I sort of gave this family of photographs to them, and they gave back to me what for me is just this beautiful body of work. And their ability to really get inside of me and surprise me sometimes with some of this work is kind of rewarding and a teaching moment for me. Like these, I remember making that picture that was in a parking garage. That photograph, I was out in rural Minnesota, and what grabbed me is I was trying to get that windshield wiper right, blade right, to reflect that atmosphere, and also each side of the bridge was different. One was one county, and one was the other county, so the railings are not the same. And that's Sue's uncle, my wife's uncle, Bill, up in North Dakota. I did a big project for the Art Institute of Chicago in 1985, photographing farm families, because there was a humongous farm crisis where there was part of a big recession that I don't want to have to go into big detail, but it was, and that is Sue's cousin Jim, who lived in a little farmhouse on a 600-acre farm in Hazleton, North Dakota, and he's now he's a Monsignor and president of the University of Mary in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Right.
This is the Cowboy Bar in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. We were there in 1981.
Can I ask you?
Sure.
Can I ask you a question about the title of the book, American Reflections, which has a kind of double meaning?
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's striking in the book is your use of reflection. Here, I mean, there's an example here, but particularly using kind of shop windows in your pictures.
Well, it's about inside outside, like what's inside the shop is a reflection of the owner's personality and character. Sometimes what they want to sell, but sometimes also what they're proud of, what they've collected. And then my reflection is the gaze of someone looking in, trying to make sense or respond or reflect on what's in there. Earlier, there was that couple was very famous, a couple in San Francisco. And this is, that's in Louisville, and that's in New York. That's a nice, this is 1976 in a little town of Browerville, Minnesota.
Right.
Okay, so.
And the other thing I wanted to ask you about is one of the things that I think is striking as we watch these images kind of scrolling past is that even though they are taken in many different cities and over several decades,
yes,
there is a kind of continuity to them. They really feel of a piece, and I'm wondering if your process in terms of how you go out into the world and take pictures, has that sort of stayed constant over time, or do you feel that has changed as you've gone along as a photographer?
I think, well, as I'm many years older than when I started, but I've tried to be consistent in maintaining my emotional connection and not including my personal opinions. Being a documentary photographer, I can't assert my own political belief. I try and leave that out of my work, because that will reflect, pardon the pun, how people are viewing what I do. I mean, I have many photographs. When you get to be my age as a photographer, or at least I have quite an archive of negatives and of work that I'm printing all the time. When I get back home to Minneapolis, I'll be printing again. That's what I do, and then I'm shooting. But it's the process is removing work that I might be when I was younger. I was angry about something, or I just take that out of my body of work. When I photographed George Floyd, I don't know if you remember that name, but he was murdered about 2 or 3 miles from where we live, and during that time, my whole neighborhood where I grew up burned down. It was on CNN for 3 or 4 days. That was my block. And I photographed George Floyd's brother 3 days after his murder, and I did a bunch of work around that period, around that 3 or 4 days. I photographed buildings smoldering, and but it was about the process and what this meant and how this changed. It changed the world, because I saw, demonstrations in London and Paris and everywhere, from that moment. And I'm kind of going on too long here, but that's part of my process is being a witness, but being an honest witness, so that the audience can make up their own mind about what it is I'm trying to do.
Yeah, and I think that sensibility really comes through in the book. I mean, you just mentioned something we exchanged by email a few weeks ago, and you told me that you're not a very digital person,
right,
and that you are you were heading into the darkroom to print pictures. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the printing, how important it is to you, the printing of pictures and using the darkroom?
Sure. I think for me, that's part of the whole process. You know, it's one thing to process film and make good negatives, you know, make good exposures, make your focus. It's a very physical process being a film photographer. You know, there's chemistry. You have to know how to nuance chemistry so it works the best for you. How to use, you know, there's not many papers left, but the ones that are pretty great. So how to get the most out of that paper, you know, the enlarging lenses, the light source. I mean, this is just kind of a in-depth deal. I'm sure people who work digitally who use Photoshop or have a similar, it's a similar but different. I mean, the execution is what matters. And I don't have an idea. The idea is not complete until I make a print. And I'm constantly editing. I have thousands, and I have about 240,000 negatives, something like that. And so I am constantly going back and discovering new work. The thing that's important, I have never deleted anything. I have all my mistakes. Every terrible, lousy, out of focus image is all among images that are more successful. And I am so grateful that I have never deleted anything, because some of that deleted work that I would have done is in this book. So I mean, I don't know what kind of statement I'm making here. I encourage you never delete anything. You know, digital files, you can store everything, right? I mean, so I would just, because you might have made a picture now that 5 years down the road, oh yeah, I think I was a little ahead of myself there. So anyway, I digress, which I usually do.
And it's a lot easier to store 240,000 digital pictures than it is 240,000 negatives.
I'm sure. Yeah, I have 40 boxes of negatives.
And I mean, I imagine that you know, this is in a sense a kind of portrait of America.
Yeah.
Not at a specific moment in time,
No.
like unlike Robert Frank's The Americans, that is set in a specific period. You span many different years, but you spoke about the process of working with Atelier XB on, you know, selecting these images. When you kind of had this edit, is there something that jumped out at you about America that you know you saw in these pictures? Something about the country, or that you maybe revisiting images that you hadn't seen in many years?
Natalie gave me more of an affection for my own country, which is really kind of powerful for me. So I'm so grateful.
That's wonderful. So we are...
And mundane pictures like this. I mean, these are just, they're just trucks, but they have meaning. You know, without them, we don't have anything, basically. Because anyway, so, and that's what feeds us. You know, and farmers. You know, I mean, that activity is what is part of the process. Like the farmers in France or in Germany or Poland or what, you know, it's everybody's doing the same kind of business. And it's all a big circle, you know, that we all need everybody. Yeah. And there's one picture, I don't know if it'll come back. It was, my friend Sarah Meiser wrote a little essay for the book, and it was based around a picture called Lucky Strikes Again. And it's a picture that somewhere here. And it's really kind of beautiful. And these were farmers on strike. And the farmers for a moratorium, this is not a long time, in 1985 to stop farm foreclosures for 1 year, because they could not make a living, and so many farms are being foreclosed on, and a lot of farmers were depressed. There was a gigantic increase in suicides because farmers could not make a living. They could not provide, because anyway, I'm going on too long. I'm sorry.
No. We are very limited in time,
Yep,
so I want to give
I'll
people
stop.
an opportunity to... Is there anybody that has a question in the audience that they would like to ask Tom?
Fantastic. We good?
I have one more question for you, which is, you know, in Europe, we we don't really know Minnesota, Minneapolis so well. And I discovered through reading the text in this book that it is a major photographic city, in that there have been some of the most important figures in photography. That, you know, John Tarkowski, for example, Alex Soth today. Minor White, who is incredibly influential as well on the trajectory that photography had. So could you tell us something about that photographic culture of your city?
Well, I think our city has changed a lot from what it used to be, but when John Tarkowski had a job at the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, it's a big it was a regional art museum, and he really loved the landscape of Minnesota and the industry of the people. I mean, Minnesota, like America, is a nation of immigrants. Even though it's 200 years later, we still are a nation of immigrants. And we are all celebrating our ethnicness every summer. And John Tarkowski did a book called The Face of Minnesota, like in 1958, which got him a job ultimately to be the curator of photography at the Museum of Modern Art. And he created a new kind of language to write about photography. If you go back to New Documents, an exhibition he did with Diane Arbus, Gary Winogrand, and Lee Friedlander in 1967, that changed photography. We are all influenced by that exhibition. Then there's been a lot of other photographers whose names you don't know that have come from Minnesota. But it's about the variety of culture there. You can be in a big city and 15 minutes later you're in a prairie. So it's real diverse. And we have Bob Dylan and Prince.
That's not a bad claim to fame as well.
No, it's pretty good.
I'm afraid that's all we have time for, but Tom, thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me talk to you guys.
And I think Tom is going to be